The honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, or Medante.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise today to speak to this important motion on behalf of the great people of Barrie, Springwater, or Medante. I am always happy to discuss the issue of border security and how we can maintain and improve our relationship with the United States. Given that Canada and the United States share the longest undefended border in the world, addressing our very real and very serious public safety issues that are facing at home are of the utmost importance to managing our relationship with our biggest trading partner and greatest ally. U.S. President-elect Trump has made it very clear that he will impose a crippling 25% tariff on all Canadian products if Canada does not fix our chaos at the border and get a handle on the fentanyl crisis that is plaguing our country. While Conservatives agree that these issues must be addressed, we don't want to address these issues for the sake of the United States, but for the sake of Canadians. For far too long, this Liberal government has taken a soft-on-crime approach to drugs at our borders, and as a result, Canadians are suffering. This Prime Minister made a deal with the British Columbia NDP to decriminalize fentanyl, crack, and heroin, and lowered jail sentences for drug kingpins, and did nothing to prevent the import of the deadly precursor chemicals that are cooked into poison in drug super labs and sold on our streets. This Prime Minister has also broken our border. Since this Prime Minister came to power, there has been a 632% increase in U.S. Border Patrol encounters with people illegally attempting to enter the United States from Canada. In the first 10 months of 2024 alone, U.S. Border Patrol has intercepted more than 21,000 people illegally crossing our border from Canada into the U.S. Mr. Speaker, I just want to remind you that I will be splitting my time with the great member from Chilliwack Hope. Thank you for that. The NDP Liberal government sat back and watched as the backlog of the number of asylum claims in Canada skyrocketed from 10,000 to 250,000 over the past 9 years. Now there are as many as 500,000 people in Canada who are here illegally. Statistics from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection show that roughly twice as many suspected terrorists have tried to cross from Canada into the U.S. as from Mexico into the U.S. in recent years. Additionally, in the 12 months up to September 2024, U.S. border agents seized about 11,600 pounds of drugs entering the United States from Canada. Seizures of fentanyl doses more than tripled between 2023 and 2024, rising from 239,000 doses to 839,000. The issue of fentanyl production in Canada has skyrocketed under this Prime Minister. Drug kingpins and gangsters are allowed to operate with impunity, and if they are caught under his soft-on-crime policies, many of these criminals can serve their sentences in the comfort of their own homes. A memo drafted by CSIS for the Prime Minister recently stated that, quote, CSIS identifies more than 350 organized crime groups actively involved in the domestic illegal fentanyl market, and that China continues to be listed as the main source country for a variety of precursor chemicals intended for the illegal production of drugs in Canada and some illegal drugs smuggled into Canada. We are producing so much fentanyl here in Canada that we become a net exporter of fentanyl rather than importer of the product. According to the RCMP, the fentanyl threat in Canada has shifted from one of importation to one of domestic production. Almost all of the fentanyl consumed in Canada is now produced in Canada, according to a criminology professor from the University of Montreal, and there is actually a production surplus. While we are certainly exporting fentanyl to the U.S. and distributing it in the domestic market here in Canada, the RCMP's Federal Serious and Organized Crime Program has stated that the fentanyl that is produced in Canada is also destined for export to Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, where drug users pay considerably higher prices for fentanyl than in Canada and the U.S. So how did we get here? Why have we become a net exporter of fentanyl? Before 2019, fentanyl was effectively legal in China. You could go on the internet and find legitimate Chinese companies selling fentanyl online. This Chinese-made fentanyl flooded Canadian streets throughout the mid-2010s. In 2019, Beijing finally caved to pressure primarily from the United States and blanket banned the production and sale of all fentanyl analogs. However, they continued to fuel the fentanyl crisis by directly subsidizing the manufacturing of precursor chemicals and materials that are used to make the drugs by traffickers. In April 2024, U.S. investigators discovered a Chinese government website that revealed tax rebates for the production of specific fentanyl precursors as well as other synthetic drugs as long as those companies sell them outside of China. We know that this had a significant impact on the Canadian production of fentanyl because seizures of precursor chemicals increased dramatically between 2020 and 2021. In the first half of 2021, our border offices seized 5,000 kilograms of precursor chemicals, up from 500 kilograms the year before. Last year, the U.S. sanctioned several Chinese companies and individuals who have profited from the trade of precursor chemicals without facing consequences in China. So far, Canada has not sanctioned any of these individuals. The enforcement of both exports and imports at our West Coast ports is also dismal. We recently did a study on auto theft at the Public Safety Committee, and we learned just how little we are searching and seizing at our ports. In 2023, the Mayor of Delta, British Columbia, called out the Liberal governments for their failure to address the rampant crime at the Port of Vancouver. He stated that, quote, "We're witnessing a relentless flow of illegal drugs, weapons, and contraband into Canada through our ports, and that threatens our national security. They need to recognize this. We have a fentanyl crisis going through our community here in Delta, through Metro Vancouver, through the province, across the nation." Just recently, Mark Webber, the CBSA union head, was on Global News and stated that, quote, "We search less than 1% of what comes into Canada. It is clear that something must be done. We must act to fix our borders and stop the rampant production of fentanyl within our borders." Many constituents have been writing and calling to ask the following: why did it take so long to address these very real issues? Why did it take the United States President-elect threatening crippling tariffs for this Prime Minister to take any meaningful steps to address the chaos at our borders and the scourge of fentanyl on our streets? Was it not enough that parents were seeing their children overdose on fentanyl in homeless encampments? That Jewish communities face threats from ISIS sympathizers who entered the country on student visas? That Canadians are being gunned down by gangsters with illegal guns that have been smuggled over our borders? All these terrible realities that Canadians are facing should have been enough for this Prime Minister to act. Instead, he stood by and told Canadians over and over again that they've never had it so good. Only Conservatives have a real plan to address the crime and chaos at our borders and bring our loved ones home drug-free. Today, we are asking all parties to support our common sense plan, calling on the Liberal government to address the illegal importation of fentanyl precursors and the illegal production and export of fentanyl here at home. Conservatives are calling the government today to reverse Liberal Bill C-5, to reinstate longer jail sentences for drug kingpins, to ban the importation of fentanyl precursors, buy high-powered scanners, put more boots on the ground at our ports to stop fentanyl and its ingredients from coming into our country, and stop buying unsafe supply of opioids. Conservatives want to stop drug overdoses so that there's not one more parent who has to bury their son or daughter after 47,000 other Canadians have died. That's more than we lost in the Second World War, and it represents a 200% annual increase in drug overdose deaths since this Prime Minister's radical liberalization of drugs. The Liberal government and everyone in this place must put partisanship aside, not just for the sake of Team Canada, but for the sake of the families who are suffering, and support our common sense Conservative plan. We must secure our borders and bring our loved ones home drug-free. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is disappointing in terms of the Conservative Party's approach, where they try to give the false narrative as if they support Canada's borders, when in reality well over 1,000 jobs were cut. Significant other cuts were made while their leader of the Conservative Party today sat around the cabinet table and made those decisions. And now there are some consequences to it. We as a government have restored those cuts and added an additional 300 staff. Yet they seem to believe, the Conservative Party, that their actions from previously had no consequence. How silly is that, Mr. Speaker? And my question to the member opposite is, can he stand in his place today and guarantee that the Conservative Party would never cut border control services again?
The Honourable Member for Barrie Springwater Oro-Medonte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard this banter around quite a bit, so I actually have some facts and figures here. These were the exact numbers of FTE full-time employees going back in the CBSA. In 2006 to 2007, there was 12,383 employees. 2015 to 2016, which is the period my member opposite is talking about, there was 13,774 full-time employees. That is a net increase So we've proven that one wrong here right now today, Speaker. The budget itself in 2005 to 2006 for CBSA, when Prime Minister Harper took over, was $1,236,000, and in 2015-16, when he left, it was almost $800,000. Those are the facts.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for the speech. I don't often have the chance to ask this colleague questions, and it's a colleague I truly appreciate. A couple of questions. First, this is a question I've asked a few times this morning, but I haven't gotten an answer from the Conservative Party. What about the fact that Quebec felt it necessary to deploy resources to protect the border, even though that's not Quebec's jurisdiction, it's under federal jurisdiction? And a second question, I heard him repeat some oft-repeated slogan. How many points did he earn through that speech?
Thank you to my colleague opposite for those, I think, good questions. Not sure about the last one, but I will mention that he's talking about the border. The border is a problem right across Canada. We've heard that. In public safety, we have been talking about the border and how porous it is. We know there's not a lot of security going on a lot of the points. We've been hearing lately in our committee that CBSA has no jurisdiction since 1932 between border points. So there's talk about putting them in place over that. We need to do some stuff. We need to just not be getting threatened with tariffs to finally take action. This has been going on a long time, for far too long, and it's a shame that it's taken a president-elect to bring this to our Prime Minister's attention.
Commentaire. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his intervention today. Always a delight to hear from him as he represents his constituents. And, I'd love to hear him share some stories of what the opioid crisis and what fentanyl has done in particular to his community.
Honourable member for Barrie Springwater or Medante.
I'm sorry. It's been absolutely terrible what this nasty drug has done in Canada. I would just like to mention a couple of the statistics. Since this Prime Minister was first elected, over 47,000 Canadians have died from drug overdoses. Just last year, 8,049 Canadians were killed by opioids. That is a 184% increase since he became Prime Minister. One of these was Brianna McDonald, who died of an overdose in a homeless encampment in Abbotsford, British Columbia. She died only a month after her 13th birthday. Greg Sword lost his 14-year-old daughter, Camilla, to a drug overdose in 2022. It's been absolutely horrific and painful to hear what's been going on. We need to deal with this. We need to get our border under control, and we need to make sure good, healthy, all-age Canadians can live a healthy, good lifestyle without fentanyl in it. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to the Conservatives continuing to talk about the drug epidemic, which is an epidemic, absolutely, there's no seemingly conversation as it's connected to poverty. And the opposition hasn't really spoken about those impacts and how they're actually going to deal with the fact that we have billionaires in this country who take billions out of the economy as opposed to reinvesting it, and a lot of what's linked to people turning to escapes to drugs, to illegal drugs, to violence, to crime and theft is actually poverty. So how would he explain how his in the pockets of billionaires party is going to actually deal with poverty?
The honourable member for Barrie Springwater or Medante.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to draw to attention something that just came out from York Regional Police, and it was Project Skyfall. And this is amazing. This is what's going on in Canada. These are facts. This is truth. This morning, York Regional Police announced they arrested 17 individuals, all on robberies and drug trafficking. They said it was a multifaceted criminal organization. There's been 83 charges laid. They seized over $14.4 million worth of drugs and weapons. And this is going to be the part that's not shocking. Of those 17 that were arrested this morning, 7 were currently out on bail. We have a serious problem in Canada. Let's deal with it.